afternoon. Thank you very much, Nora, and also Sokrati, Yannis, and Eyal for inviting me here for this conference. Also, big thanks to Marcela and all the wonderful Aksioma team. I will be bringing in some information regarding what happens when the metaphor of the software is used for the planet, for Earth. So I'll start by basically reminding us in a way that the ongoing environmental crisis presents a kind of degree of complexity that it's impossible now for the human mind to fully perceive, process, and face. Everything around the crisis is being carefully calculated. Sensors, satellite, drones, and artificial intelligence programs, infrastructures of different scale, are all at work monitoring and predicting changes in the atmosphere, the oceans, and in species going extinct. As Karen Baker has written in her book, Gaia's Web, nowadays, the entirety of the Earth's surface, from the depths of the ocean to the atmosphere, is continuously being tracked by remote monitoring systems. This has led to the creation of a digital twin of our planet that is a virtual model of our world, rendered in digital data. So the world discovered by ambitious digital environmental monitoring systems, as Baker writes, and this can be found in forests, they can be found in oceans, they can be found in, also attached sometimes to living organisms, like on trees or on insects. And they're all there to basically gather data about environmental changes. Now, following the changes and the challenges of environmental technologies, for more than a decade now, scholar Jennifer Gabris has been emphasizing how the aim of using such tech has been in order not only to monitor, but also to program Earth as an infrastructure. In her, in a way, classic book now, 10 years later, called Program Earth, back in 2015 she published it, Jennifer Gabris, quoting McLuhan, had specifically written that the Earth became programmable when the first satellite appeared. This was Sputnik 1, and it basically captured back then an auditory landscape which revealed valuable information for the Earth's atmosphere. Gabris also mentions in this book and in the first chapter how important it is that it was then that the first pictures of the Earth were captured by astronauts, the Earthrise and the blue marble. Now, as part of my talk today, what I would like us to pay a bit of attention at is how different metaphors for the Earth emerged since then, since it was captured from a distance. And these metaphors basically approach the planet as a system, as a machine, or as an engine. One reference that we can recall is from Buckminster Fuller. He used the term spaceship Earth back in 1969. And here, I have a kind of a quote from the book, where Fuller writes that spaceship Earth was so extraordinarily well invented and designed that to our knowledge, humans have been on board for it for 2 million years, not even knowing that we're on board on a ship. One of the interesting things, to me, he writes, about our spaceship is that it is a mechanical vehicle, just as an automobile. If you own an automobile, you realize that you must put oil and gas into it, that you must put water in the radiator, and take care of the car as a whole. And he continues that we have not been seeing our spaceship Earth as an integrally designed machine, which to be persistently successfully must be comprehended and serviced in total. So it's kind of interesting to read here and to pay attention to how he basically thinks of the planet as a kind of a spaceship that humans, as the crew of the spaceship, have to take care of it. Another kind of reference, very common and maybe also very dear to us, comes from James Lovelock, who in his book Gaia spoke about the Earth as a superorganism, as a well-regulated system, and also as a cybernetic system. We can also recall references from people that have worked on networks and system thinking, like Fritjof Capra, who spoke, for instance, about the web of life and about how in nature, networks reside within other networks and systems nest within other systems. And these scholars were kind of amazed by the self-regulation of the living world. Now, following this genealogy of metaphors, Baker, who I already mentioned in the beginning of my talk, coins this term Gaia's web, and she described Gaia's web as an interplay of digital and ecological networks, as the fusion of the World Wide Web and the web life, and as an internet of earthlings, basically following, here we can understand, the Internet of Things. Now, why is it interesting to pay attention to these terms and these metaphors? Because one could say, is there a problem when we approach Earth as a machine or as a system of systems? Because anyway, this new techno-ecological reality is meant basically to capture, to manage, and to mitigate change, and to remind us of our dependence on the living environment. There is quite some argumentation here, and here I just bring briefly a kind of a phrase, a comment by Bruno Latour, who criticized Lovelock in his book Facing Gaia, saying that somehow the metaphor of the organism is meaningless unless we imagine a general engineer. So what he argues, and what we can kind of keep in mind here, is that he says if Gaia is compared to a machine, then at the same time it's implied that there is some sort of clockmaker, some engineer that has to control it. And Latour reminds us somehow that Earth, by the way, was never fabricated. It was not human-made. It is not to be maintained. It's not a human-made object. Now, I find Latour's positioning very interesting, but at the same time, the way I understand it, I think that this critique for technomorphism is especially meaningful when it comes to one specific thing, and this is when we see that planet is to be managed in a way as it is a technological system. And I would like to flag, in a way, 3 points that, in my opinion, kind of reveal the problematics of this metaphor. The first one relates to the notion and the strategy, if we want to call it like that, of geoengineering or climate engineering, which is in a way a great example of how the Earth is approached as a machine or as a system that can be optimized and updated. Its proponents, as you might know, argue that climate change can be combated by reflecting solar radiation back into the space, or by stimulating phytoplankton growth in the oceans. And this way, there will be a removal of CO2 from the atmosphere. The temperature will be kept again in better levels, and so on. And this might be the case, maybe. Maybe it would be possible to optimize and restore the climate. But the problem is that because the climate itself does operate as a system, then we wouldn't know which areas are going to really profit and which might suffer. The second point that I would like to bring, the second element that I would like to flag, has to do with questions of governance when it comes to the environment. Because we can leave geoengineering a bit aside as a kind of a future-oriented scenario. But returning to our present, we need to reflect upon the infrastructures that are being used for environmental purposes now. And some scholars already use this term, the green panopticon, in order exactly to stress the constant surveillance of the environment, implying somehow that a biopolitical technology is being used, which administers and controls life. And again here, I'm bringing in some knowledge from Jennifer Gabrys, who discusses in her work how valuable, really, the tools, the technological tools can be, but how at the same time, she says, these processes are directly linked to governance and management. In her opinion, vegetation, plants, trees become technological when they need to respond in a way to the infrastructure supplied to them. Also, existing people and communities living within forests, for instance, are affected when techniques and tools that might be in conflict with their own practices are being introduced. And finally, not all forests, of course, are smart or becoming smart. So there are different asymmetries that are coming in, different asymmetries that remind us of how we're discussing surveillance all these years when we're talking about us as citizens and users. And the third point that I would like to bring in has to do, of course, with issues that have to do with exploitation and extractivism. One should not dismiss how technology always depends on the planet and its resources. The natural resources needed for building, for powering, and maintaining infrastructures, as well as the problem of toxic waste, remain an open issue, along with the asymmetrical kind of symmetries that are coming in, with who is being supported, which lands are being supported, and which lands are being affected. So having this in mind, we might want to ask, who organizes, who decides, and who runs Earth's infrastructures and updates? How open and how democratic are the processes involved? And to a degree, we could say that this has to do with science, but to a bigger degree, it has to do with big tech and with sovereign states. And here, in a way, we have to deal with a narrative where addressing Earth as a system, addressing Earth as a machine, as an engine, also assumes that something can be fixed, that it can be used, that it can be managed. And all this, in my opinion, implies some sort of distance, some sort of detachment. It's like we are outside the planet, it's like we're outside of it, and we can control it, we can fix it. And why would we want that? Possibly because we would like to continue living the way we used to. And the we, of course, here refers to the privileged part of the world. So in a way, all these technologies are kind of mitigation technologies that offer solutions for a more sustainable future, but which, on the other end, do kind of stick to the model of good life, of the imaginary, of kind of continuous and limitless progress. And another point that can come in when we talk about this distance is like, how much agency do we really have when we talk about such infrastructures? So having said all this, what do we really do when we realize that the Earth is not just another system that can be used, can be optimized, can be updated? How can we claim agency, access, and involvement for a more sustainable and fair future without negating technology? And to answer these questions, I will basically bring in some examples from artistic practices. As myself, I come from the media studies and the arts. And I will try to maybe point towards some directions. The first artwork that I would like to refer to is by Barbara Marcel, an artist from Brazil who lives in Germany, and who created this very beautiful documentary called Cinecipo, which is a kind of a 4-channel documentary. And here I have an image from one of the 4 different chapters and channels. And while watching it, we learned the story of the Amazon Tall Tower Observatory, also called ATO. So this is a tower which is like 300 meters high, and which is meant to study the interactions between the forest, the soils, and the atmospheres in the region. The tower is part of an important cooperation between Brazil and Germany, and it's built and it's financed by the Amazon Research Institute and the Max Planck Institute. And of course, it's accessible to scientists and to the technicians working there. It's not accessible to other people. Now, the artist who's from Brazil managed to get access also for her documentary, and what she did, what was her idea and what we see in the film, is that she brought 2 different communities in conversations. She brought the scientists in conversation with the people living in the forest, and there is an exchange of scientific evidence and kind of ancestral knowledge, where we see how forms of observation, forms of care are being discussed between the 2 different groups. A second project that I would like to mention comes from the Metallurgy duo, a couple of 2 artists, they're a couple. They live in UK, and this is their work called Hydromancy, which they created when they had a residency at the National Oceanographic Centre of Southampton. What they did for this work is that they basically focused on the tools and the technologies and the spaces that are involved in ocean sensing and ocean modeling. So as viewers, we kind of visit this coral lab, which is bathed in blue light, and we specifically kind of see all the different infrastructures that are not so known to us. Through the video and the voice and the sound, they kind of underline that the ocean is not just a scientific object, but rather a sentient agent, a subject, which is the carrier of knowledge and change. Furthermore, I would like to bring our attention to how artists remind us that Earth has its kind of own informants. Because if we want to acknowledge how Earth functions as a well-regulated system, then we also need to kind of really acknowledge the agents and the role of Earth's agents and the role in this planet. So some examples can be found in the work of Sibylle Neumayer, who is an artist that has, in her work, spoken a lot of insects. And this was a work about the role of dragonflies and how dragonflies can also be, in a way, bioindicators of pollution and climate. So she highlights how the insects are sensitive to temperature and to water availability and to water quality. But what she specifically focuses on is that the idea here is not to objectify insects, to see them as carriers of information, but rather to understand how different bodies are affected by climate changes and how we need to start talking more and more about how we restore our relationships to the species. And here another work by a duo called Benera and Stefan, that they focus more on pollen and how the pollen can inform us about past climates. And to move on to the third and final kind of part of my talk, I would like to now turn to the question of, so if we take in mind that we need to think with the Earth and with its agents, then if we return to technology, which are the technologies that we can think of? Which are the technologies that can be, how technologies can be revisited, can be rethought? And I would like here to bring two references that could be of interest. The first reference is the work of Ivan Illich from the 70s, who wrote this book on tools for conviviality. Illich basically spoke of the need of these technologies that would basically empower people by having the opportunity to be active participants, by being autonomous, and by also building social relationships. And this is a reference that is being used a lot recently by different practitioners and theorists who kind of bring in some ideas that remind us also of what we have discussed when discussing the free and open source movement. That has to do with how we need technologies that we can relate to, with how we need technologies that are accessible, that we can appropriate, that we can use in communities, and that will not harm the living environment, that take into consideration, in a way, the circle of life. So this is the first reference. And the second one comes from a scholar, a software and critical maker called Yadira Sánchez Benítez, who wrote about the potential of tequiologies, which is a term that comes from the Nahuatl language and is inspired by community work in villages of Mexico. What Benítez does, and it reminds us a bit of the work of Illich, is basically more of an invitation to think about how collective and community intelligence can come in and inform machine learning. And she describes how, for instance, in forests, in agriculture, communities could make their own decisions about how to use infrastructures, about how to use data in their lands. So where could we find such examples? I think examples are to be located in different areas, developed by artists, engineers, and communities. One example that we can refer to is the Island School for Social Autonomy, ISA, which is located on the island of Vis, and it has been funded exactly as a place that imagines, experiments, and cultivates forms of knowledge production. rethinking the understanding of good life in the age of extinction. Its members, it's basically an open kind of school and community, are philosophers, artists, engineers, activists, and practitioners. And together they learn how to design and build their own infrastructure, how to cultivate the land, and how to connect to the social and climate memory of the island. So here we see some images that the first one more deals with focuses more on how people work with technology, and the second one more about how they work with land or with building. Another paradigm would be the work of the Hyperconf from Tinos, the Greek island of Tinos. This is where they work. And they have developed energy-related projects in collaboration with local farmers and scientists, bringing together scientific and local knowledge. And this is a work that they did some years ago, where, for instance, they used sensors, AI models, but also traditional farming practices. And we can also think, of course, of people, artists and designers who turn to low-tech and as a possible response to the technologies that we need. Chris de Decker would be a kind of an example here, who is a proponent of low-tech, and this is his website, which provides a lot of information about how one can build their own prototypes. So old and often forgotten knowledge is connected to new, and also knowledge comes from community. Knowledge can come from how the weather plays a role, and how all this can help us build prototypes for a more sustainable society. And more examples could come in from artists like Valentina Karga, who lives in Berlin, or James Bridle, that we know as a writer, but also an artist who lives in Greece. Also kind of building works, paradigms, prototypes that embrace kind of knowledge also from the local area and the community. So these different examples that I showed, I think show some common features. The first one is, I think, the fact that they are, in a way, they embrace situatedness. They are projects that they are realized, taking in mind the characteristics of a specific place and the communities, the people, the audiences that they involve. The second is that they involve working with technology, but also with the land, pointing to this need to reconnect with the earth and to observe Earth's rhythms and to learn how to live sustainably or autonomously while being on the land. And the third aspect that I see is that in all cases, attention is paid to the materials, to the energy and the waste, and they take in mind how the living environment is affected by any intervention. Now, what does this bring us to? Of course, it would sound very naive if I would say that these convivial infrastructures are the response to the climate crisis that we are experiencing. But what I want to stress is the importance of their socio-ecological logic and the proposed way of thinking, acting, and living. All in all, what we see in these examples is in a way a sense of belonging that they offer, a sense of agency that they also kind of point at, and also a kind of a different understanding of scale, an understanding of scale which relates to what one can see, what one can feel, what one can understand. And this sense of scale emerges from the relationships that are found between members of a community, the relationships that can be found between the human and the non-human world, or between different communities. So distance, in this case, or separation between worlds, fades away. And what rather emerges or prevails is like the interconnectedness. Now, and to conclude, in an era that high-end digital infrastructures are constantly designed and planned for the living environment, it is expected that our relation to the natural environment changes and that it is mediated. But what we can take from these examples that I shared with you is the attention that is given to the plurality of agencies, to the plurality of temporalities and knowledges. And all this can still be found within the messy ecological entanglements of our times. And if we feel that we do need to stick to the complex system thinking and its metaphors, we can still remember this phrase from Haraway that the relation is the smallest unit of analysis and the one that we need to, in a way, always return to. Thank you very much.